Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our guest today is a dear personal friend of mine. Oonagh Van Den Berg is a lawyer by training, an entrepreneur by vocation, and she grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. She went on to become a lawyer, a compliance officer, recruiter, and later a consultant and educator. A married mother of two, Oonagh is going to be sharing her thoughts with us today on what makes for a good compliance officer, a recurring theme and one that's germane to HKU, given our emerging, budding compliance and regulation program. So with that, I turn to Oonagh. Oonagh, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ajay. And it's my sentiments as well. It's wonderful to join such a good friend this morning. So thank you for having me.
So you grew up in Northern Ireland in the 80s, a time of much tumult and sectarian violence. And your dad was not just a regular cop, he was with Special Branch. So what was your upbringing like, and what was it growing up in a fractious society? I mean, I don't know if he was a martinet, a strict disciplinarian, but in a society like that, you can't necessarily let kids do what they want because, you have to protect yourself. Against that background, what was your life like, the early part of your life?
Despite it, well, it was normal because I didn't know anything else. Right. And it's only now as an adult I look back and think, yeah, that wasn't normal. How was it growing up? I'm very, very blessed. I'm blessed in the fact that my mother comes from a Catholic family and my father comes from a Protestant family, both from Belfast, and both would be on the edges of in terms of their convictions, if I can say that politely. So it was actually a really privileged position to be in growing up. If I look back, obviously as a child, I didn't see that, but I saw both viewpoints. I was able to see the challenges from both sides, and that put me in a really privileged position growing up, in a position which I now look back and realize that privileged was the word for it. I wasn't blinkered. I didn't have a set viewpoint. I was able to go into the respective communities and really understand what the challenges were, and then form an objective opinion based on what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. How was it being the daughter of a policeman and a quite a high-ranking policeman? Yes, as I said, it was normal to me. It was normal for us to be driving down a road and a van to open in front of us and start shooting at the car when I was like 4 or 5 years old. That was normal. It was normal for us to have bombs planted under our car and in the garden. It was normal to go to bed in one bed at night and wake up the next morning in another bed because we'd had to leave the house overnight due to security reasons. These were all normal things. But I'm grateful and thankful to say that by the time I got to around 7 years old, 7.5, my parents made the decision to put myself and my older sister into boarding school with, in particular with other military children. And that was really great. That took us away from kind of the mess of moving all the time. I think by the time I was around 7 years old, I'd moved school 5 times, which is pretty significant as a child. Yeah. And we'd moved house around the same number, and actually a little bit more because we'd had to live in some police stations for a few weeks here and there whilst we got into new secure housing. So yes, it was a different childhood, but the one thing that I look back, it's a bit like that movie Life is Beautiful. I don't know if you're familiar with it. About
the concentration camp. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And what the father Giuseppe did was he made it into a game for his son. So the seriousness of being, and I can't compare my upbringing to a concentration camp, but just that comparison was my parents, we never felt scared. We never felt worried for our lives, for our security. There was such a sense of love and security in my family. So whilst all of these crazy things are happening around us, we were secure, we were loved. And I look at my parents with absolute credit now as a mother myself as to what they managed to achieve, the security and the love that they managed to portray and make us feel as children even in the most extreme circumstances. And, in addition to my father, in his job, my mother is actually an international best-selling author. She's also CEO of Help the Aged, which is one of the biggest charities in the UK for elderly people. So my mother would be, again, my mother would even be on TV quite often, on the Late Show in Ireland. So, whilst my father was in the police and all this was happening, my mother in her own right was a very successful independent businesswoman and an entrepreneur. So it's incredible looking back to the privilege that I had being raised in the circumstances I was raised in.
Certainly their prominence to some extent would put you and your siblings in the public eye. I mean, certainly they were in the public eye, and then in the eyes of some, that makes you a target as opposed to keeping a low key approach. But your reference to the film Life is Beautiful is quite poignant in that it makes me think of the expression that pain is necessary because pain is the price of living, but suffering is a choice. I take that to mean, therefore, that attitude makes a world of difference.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that I take with me every single day. When you wake up in the morning, the first thing you should be grateful for is that you woke up, because that's a great way to start your day, because some people don't have that privilege. And I'm one of these people that I try always to see the positive in situations. Every negative has a positive. No, that's science. but it's actually the motto that I live by. Things happen in our life, and I'm a massive believer that things happen to teach us lessons. And if you don't learn from those lessons, they will repeat themselves until you do learn from them. So I take every negative, every bad situation, as difficult as it can be, as a learning curve to develop myself, to develop how I interact, how others see me, and also to learn how I can grow. And it's, again, something I'm very passionate about as well. Is, my parents installed this attitude into my sisters and I of constant growth. You're never, you want to strive to be the best version of yourself. And my mother has a motto that she used to say to us as children. She would say, we all come into this world the same and we all go out the same, but it's what you do with your life that makes a difference. And so I've really taken that on board. It would be a very sad state of affairs if I left this world and within 1 or 2 generations, my name was never heard again. But what I want to do is I want to try and make a difference. I want a legacy where I can look back and I can be proud of my life. And if that even means making a difference to one person, that's what I want to achieve in my life. So again, going back to how my parents raised my sisters and I, they installed such a sense of duty in us as well, a duty to look after others, to leave the world in a better place than what we found it. And yeah, God, I'm going to get emotional. I feel so privileged to have had the upbringing I had, because it gave me such an amazing perspective on life, and a privileged perspective where I can be just so much more balanced, but also constantly striving to improve the world that we live in.
It's interesting because there are people your age, some cases maybe a little younger, some cases maybe a little older, that I've encountered in my life. And the prejudices, preferences, and aversions that from your background, not necessarily your background, having one parent being Catholic and another being a Protestant, but from Northern Ireland. And those prejudices have jaded them to this day. So it's interesting that you don't necessarily I don't want to sound flippant, but you don't necessarily have that baggage. And I don't want, maybe baggage isn't the right word, because there's a reason why they have that hate with them, because of what was done to them and those they care about. And so again, things that happen early in life leave a lasting mark.
Yeah. I think what I have seen, again, going back to my early experiences, as you mentioned, the norming and forming years, I have seen how that baggage has eaten away at people like a cancer. It really
mostly
does.
Guys.
It destroys them.
It's mostly guys, yeah, in my experience.
And it's really, really sad to see people that are so consumed with bitterness And the truth is, I don't want to curse here, but bad things will happen to all of us in our lives. And, either you can sit and dwell on it, or you can pick yourself up, dust yourself off and move on. And as I mentioned, yes, you could spend your life being bitter about things that have happened, about, friends, families, relatives that have been hurt, maimed, injured. Or you can take the attitude, well, my father was shot 7 times at once. And he lost one of his lungs, lost one of his vocal cords, lost the muscle in the top of one of his arms. He actually had to go to England for 9 months to rehabilitation to learn how to speak again because of the injury to his vocal cords. He was quite young at the time, and he also lost all of his hair because of the medication. And his heart stopped 4 times on the operating table, which meant that he suffered some brain damage. And my father could have spent the rest of his life being bitter. And one of the men that shot my father was actually one of the quite well known, the hunger strikers, as I'm sure you're familiar in Northern Ireland. And
only from what I read.
Yeah, it's pretty extreme. I remember my mother and father telling me about when the hunger strikers were on hunger strike, and there was that kind of countdown to when people were unfortunately passing away for their beliefs. And it got to the point where the gentleman that had shot my father, he passed away. And I said to my mother and father, how did that make you feel? And they said, it was one of those moments where it was just sad. It was sad because this person believed so much in their convictions that they were willing to give their life for it. And my father said, I couldn't be angry at him anymore. I couldn't be angry at the man that stole my youth from me, that took away my health, because he was doing something that he believed in. And my father was just doing his job, but this other gentleman was fighting for a cause he believed in. So that's the environment that I was raised in, an environment where the worst thing can happen to you. But yet there was that element of, you have to look at things from different perspectives. And that's again, something, not to bring this back into the work that I do in compliance, but that's what is so important about the work that I do in compliance. Compliance is all about perspective. It's all about belief systems. It's all, and maybe this is a very extreme example, but it's all about that intrinsic understanding of what is right and doing the right thing. And I've been able to take some of those lessons I've learned into the work that I do now. And a lot of the work that we do in compliance as well is psychological work as well. It's getting people to understand the importance of why they need to believe in being compliant and understanding the right from wrong. So, sorry, I know that's all a little bit jumbled there, kind of bringing it back into compliance, but I suppose
that aspect of empathy, you don't typically learn that in an LLM program. I'm sorry.
No, you don't. But yes, they say that empathy is the highest form of consciousness, and I really believe that.
I was attending a Chicago Council on Foreign Relations event some years ago. A former member of the Reagan administration was there, and he said, the attitude seems to be to hell with your suffering. What about my pain? That was how a lot of people are disposed to. So, moving ahead to brighter days. What drew you to the legal profession and later on the compliance profession? What made you see that as a viable career?
Yeah, it was actually quite strange. I still remember being quite young, and I'm talking here like 9, 7, 8 years old, and people saying, "What do you want to do when you're older?" And I always wanted to be a lawyer. I don't know why. It was just something. It was maybe that being, finding justice, and being able to support the underdog. And that's another thing that I've learned. About when to invest your emotions and everything in helping other people is, that's something you need to be very conscious about doing, because it can consume you. When I chose to go into law, I very quickly realized that criminal law was not for me. And the reason why it wasn't for me was I would never be able to leave my work in the office. I would be bringing that home with me every day. I love to get very involved in the work that I'm doing. And I realized that criminal law takes a person, I wouldn't say being able to be detached, but somebody that can close the door of the office when they leave the office and separate their personal life from their work life. And I'm somebody that, my work is as much part of me as everything else. And I have struggled for many, many years to get a work-life balance because of that. Some of my best decisions or some of my best ideas I come up with in the shower. I'm constantly thinking about work. I love what I do. So yeah, I got into law, realized that I enjoyed it, but what I really loved was regulation. And after participating in a master's degree at Maastricht University, I had the privilege of being offered a traineeship with the European Central Bank.
A lot of people from that program end up going on to the UN, I understand.
Yes, UN, World Trade Organization, the European Commission. I was part of the team that won the Commission European Law Moot Court competition, which is a very prestigious European law.
Did you go up against Jessup? Did you go up against Jessup or?
Of course, and we won. Mic drop.
Jessup's the name of the program, but I think
Jessup is the name of that. That's the I think
Tufts often makes it to the finals.
But Maastricht has an incredible record of it, and also our other colleagues on our course, they participated in the World Trade Organization Moot Court, and they won that. So we were all overachievers. We were all doing very well. And as a result of that, you get offered opportunities to do internships. So they're not guaranteed. You have to go through a whole interview process. And when I applied, there was a choice between the Commission in Brussels or going to the ECB in Frankfurt. And my challenge at that time was financial. I paid for myself to go through university. My parents were always of the attitude, we will support you fully till you're 18, but once you turn 18, you're on your own. And so my sisters and I were required to support ourselves. It was a big life lesson because we had a very privileged upbringing up until then.
I'm telling you, a lot of Hong Kong kids don't realize how good they've got it.
No, they do not. And where all of these other students were going off with the European rail passes and traveling around Europe at the weekend, I had two jobs. I worked as a research assistant at the university, and I worked in the Mercedes-Benz call center for the customer service, helping people to switch off their alarms on their cars. That was my job. So I was working all the time while studying. And when I got offered potential opportunities for the internship, the Commission doesn't pay. You have to pay. And I wasn't financially in a position to be able to afford to live in Brussels and to go to the Commission. And also as well, working, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Treaty of Rome and the various European legislation, but for example, the internship that I looked at doing was within the Article 94 department. That was it. You get to focus on one section of the legislation for the entirety of your internship. Whereas the ECB, they paid fully for the internship. They also paid for a beautiful apartment on the river in Frankfurt, which was very nice. It was definitely a fur coat, no knickers situation. I had this beautiful house. It all looked great, but I had very little money in the bank. But what they paid was enough to support my day to day. And the ECB was a brilliant eye opener because I had found a real love for regulation when I was doing my master's, when I was participating in the master's program. And one of the things that I found at the ECB was I was having to speak with the Central Bank of Ireland and the Bank of England in monetary policy. And here was me, 24 years old, just left university. I thought I knew everything. And I very quickly was humbled because I realized
by macroeconomic policy.
Yeah, exactly. I knew nothing. I knew nothing. What I didn't know was I can read regulation, pardon the pun, like Rain Man. I'm very, very, very good at reading regulation, if I say so myself. What I didn't know was products. I didn't know how financial markets worked. Therefore, when I spoke with these seasoned lawyers and veterans at the Bank of England, the Central Bank of Ireland on monetary policy and saying, right, we're changing some of the legislative requirements, they would say, wait a second, this won't work for this product or that product. And my response was, well, I'm sorry, but you have to do it. And that was a really embarrassing situation for me to be in because I'm somebody that likes to really understand, fully what I'm doing so that I can be informed and I can better correspond with people. So after leaving the ECB, I realized that if I wanted to be good at my job and I wanted to be a good regulatory lawyer, I needed to learn products. And that's where I went to London, and I got a job in JP Morgan Asset Management in the product development team. And my job was to ensure that the products met the legal requirements for the various countries, for example, Luxembourg, Germany, etc. But what I learned was how to create basket funds and how the diversification, the risk profiling, the product diversification, everything happens within those baskets. So that was my first introduction to products. And slowly from there, and by the way, this was before the whole Google age. This was where after work, I needed to study. I needed to learn about products, and I would find every single piece of material, whether it was from a library or from work, and I would read to learn about products and really understand the financial system that we were operating and working within so that I could better do my job. And that's one thing I stand over in my career. I meet many compliance officers that don't understand the products or the business that they're working within. That is your 101. When you walk into a room with anybody in the business, the first thing, especially both on the public and private side, but more so on the public side, they're going to be the traders are going to be a bit more aggressive. The minute that they smell that you don't know what you're doing, the confidence is gone and they've switched off. You need to be able to go in there I wouldn't say as informed. You're not expected to be a trader, but you're expected to be able to hold your own in a conversation. And that is what I believe really differentiates people working in the compliance space when they have that knowledge. No, I'm not saying it because I have it, but I've seen it throughout my career. So yeah, going to JP Morgan was a great experience for me. I learned so much. And whilst I was there, I stumbled across this compliance department. I never knew compliance existed. And sorry, there's a lot of noise. It's very rainy outside, so you probably hear the rain. And it's very loud. So when I was at JP Morgan, I discovered this compliance department. And one of the things that I was really impressed with was, one, they dealt with the regulatory interpretation, which was what I loved. But secondly, they seemed to go to the pub at lunchtime and then didn't do much during the rest of the day. And I thought, hey, I could do this job. This sounds like it would work for me.
I've heard that.
And that was during the early Oonagh years. So I decided to look for a job in compliance, and I went to see a few recruiters. And I always remember going into a recruitment office in London Wall, in the middle of London. And I went to see this lady and I said, right, I'd love to work in compliance. I've undertaken my master's in Maastricht. We won I was part of the team that won the commission side of the European Law Moot Court. I've trained in the European Central Bank. And just to be clear, the ECB, in my day, around 2,500 people apply for one role. And that's how the intern, and one person gets it. And I was very privileged to achieve it. Now, I think it's around 10,000 applicants for each internship. So it was a very prestigious traineeship to get, very, very hard to get it. And this woman, and then obviously I'd worked in JP Morgan, and this lady looked at me, this recruiter, and said, I'm sorry, but I can't get you a job in compliance. And I said, I'm sorry, but I don't understand. I have the legal qualifications. I have, I've been learning about products. I've worked at the European Central Bank. I'm working at JP Morgan. She said, yes, you've no experience, so I can't sell you. So I'm sorry, but there's the door, and please go out. And I always say this, I'm very proud to say that within 18 months, not only was I working in compliance, but I won UK Young Compliance Officer for the Year for the whole industry. And that's a massive, and to this day, I still want to walk in with my trophy and set it on her desk and say, remember when you told me that I couldn't get a job in compliance? Well, not only did I get the job, but I managed to get voted as one of the best in the industry. And it was kind of like, that Pretty Woman moment when she walks in with the bags.
Yeah.
Big mistake. So yeah, it was difficult getting into compliance. When you don't have the experience on your CV, recruiters don't look at you twice. When you apply for jobs in banks, if you can't show the experience, it's very hard to get in the door. And that is something that I've always hadn't a problem with throughout my career. You know, I speak to lots of people across the industry trying to get into compliance, who are trying to get training, who want to change into different areas. And there are so many barriers to entry, whether it's because of the cost of examinations, whether it's because of experience, whether it's, you know, whether it's just because HR selection process has said, you know, these CVs don't have these keywords, and they filter them for like 10 keywords, and they don't see 7 of them, out the window they go. So I think that's something as an industry, you know, if we want innovation and we want people to come into this space who can really help us to think how we can better develop risk controls, we shouldn't be focusing on academic prowess or indeed experience, but we should be looking for a diversification of mindsets and backgrounds, because that is what breeds innovation. I wouldn't hire a room full of Oonaghs, because I already have one, and one is more than enough. And anybody that's worked with me will tell you that.
Yeah, I think you can attest to that.
There's only enough space for one Oonagh in a team. But when I'm hiring for a team, I deliberately will hire people that are different than me in terms of mindset experience, because I want that healthy challenge. I want to drive innovation. And the only way to achieve that is through diversification of capabilities, mindsets, and visions. And that's something we as an industry need to get much better at as well.
Let's pick up on that on the other side of the break. Just want to say, please go ahead and subscribe to hkufintech.com to stay abreast of regulatory ramblings, updates, as well as news on all the other things we're up to. And our podcast is hosted by the RegTech Lab and the HKU Standard Chartered FinTech Academy and the HKU NX Professional Certificate in FinTech. Please sign up.